Sorry, I don't love you. Afraid I've grown accustomed to. Cause with you something isn't wrong, something isn't wrong, something isn't right. I wish you could be happy. Hope it's inspired by the bottle at the pharmacy. Why does it seem like everybody knows everyone but you? Oh baby,
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back with our 5th episode. This week we are talking all about Harry Potter, the movies more so than the books, but there will probably be a little talk of both. And this week our guest is Chris Fago. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing good. Just hanging out on a nice warm Sunday in Atlanta.
Oh yeah. Do you guys get a ton of that East Coast humidity there too? I know when I was in Philly, the humidity was kind of unbearable.
So we definitely have a humidity problem in the summer. Right now, we're going through this weird thing where Wednesday will be November 2nd, and the high is supposed to be 88.
Yeah,
and I'm kind of alarmed at that because I was hoping, it would be fall, but it seems like the global warming is really showing its strength here because 2 weeks ago we were in the 70s, but I mean, I don't know when fall and winter are going to actually come this year, and it's kind of weird.
Yeah, well, I definitely understand weird weather because I live in Southern California where there isn't really any weather. So, it's like we know it's fall and winter when we kind of sort of get some rain, but not really because it's California. Unless you're in San Francisco. San Francisco gets way more rain.
We definitely get the rain. I guess for me, the thing is like summer is so brutal. So I like to look forward to fall. But this year we just, it's not as humid right now, but it's still like upper 80s is kind of ridiculous for, end of October.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know you just recently watched through all 8 of the Harry Potter movies. Was that the first time you had watched them all, or did you watch them as they came out originally?
So that's a great starting point. So I actually just went on a week-long vacation where I unplugged from the web and took time off work, and I didn't do anything but go to the beach, cook meals, and watch like one Harry Potter a day because they're about 2.5 to 3 hours long each.
Right.
And I found my wife and I tried to fit in more than one. We were there for 7. We were there for 7 days, and we tried to fit in 2 like the first night so that we wouldn't have too much panic going on.
Right.
But being at the beach all day and then trying to watch like a 3-hour movie, the sun really tears you. So, it wasn't the first time that I had watched them all. It was the first time I had watched them in a row like that.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that that was what was really great about it was, before I saw them when they came out, so in sequential order, but I mean, the first one came out in 2001, so I hadn't, I'd seen it since then, but I definitely hadn't watched all of them together.
Right.
I think the last time I watched Harry Potter as a whole, as a not a trilogy, as a franchise. The last time I watched the Harry Potter franchise was when Deathly Hallows Part 2 came out.
Okay.
So, I mean, I really hadn't watched them since 2001 in order. I mean, we would watch them here and there, but it's so hard to cram 8 movies when you're looking at 16 hours. And when do you ever have 16 hours uninterrupted for a franchise?
What I find to be interesting is I remember watching these movies. I don't know if I necessarily went to see them in theaters, but I checked our DVD shelf recently here at home, and we have, I think, 1 through 6 on DVD, and then we just never got, the Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2. And I don't remember if I saw Part 1 in theater right away, but I know I did do a midnight screening for Part 2 because that was July 2011, so that was the summer I had just graduated from high school. So it's like, one of my friends and I, we just went, kind of sat in line there and switched off whoever would go run to the Starbucks to go to the bathroom while we sat there for hours, And
yeah. And that's something I remember. I definitely remember the first I'm sorry, I definitely remember the last one
Yeah.
and doing that, seeing it at midnight, and the lines were incredible. And I think Harry Potter as a franchise is, I know this is really going to hurt a lot of people's feelings, but I think it's better than Star Wars, both story wise, visually. The production is, it's better because it's all in a 15-year span. The technology in 2001 to now when it finished, it's just so much more together. I love Star
Yeah.
Wars, but when you watch the first three, and then if you dare watch the 1, 2, and 3 that came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, it just, you can see like how different, how drastic. You can tell that they were filmed 30 years apart.
Right. And I think, with Star Wars, that didn't really give people the opportunity to grow up with these films as
Right.
much as probably you and I were able to. Because, like I said, the last movie came out right after I had finished high school. So I literally grew up with this book series and these movies my entire childhood, pretty much up until I was 18. So,
And I had a similar, so yours was shifted. Mine was shifted a little bit differently because you had said like the last one came out your senior year of high school, like you just graduated.
yeah.
And so let's see, the movies for me were freshman year of high school to the last year of college.
Right.
So on an emotional like scale, like I went through high school and college kind of seeing how they dealt with a lot of issues that people every day deal with, like the loss of friends and family as an adult.
Right.
But yeah, it was really interesting from the perspective of, all right, we have 7 days, we have 8 movies, let's really try and hammer it out. And I think there's a lot of little things that I either didn't remember, or I guess in the course of time you don't pick up on, like watching them age. I think it was from like 1 to 2 it was really drastic.
Yeah.
And I think that goes into play because of how long it takes to make a movie, right? So the first movie, I mean, came out in 2001, but you're looking at 9 months to a year of filming and production. So they're even a year younger than the next time. They're probably 2 years younger than when the second one started filming. And
Right.
and I think the guy who has one of the characters who has the biggest physical changes is Malfoy. Like he doesn't even look like what he looked like when he was a child. Like he completely. But it's the same actor. But if you didn't know, you wouldn't even think that they were the same actor. You'd just think that they just got another like blonde British guy.
Yeah, and it's funny even seeing Tom Felton and stuff now. I'm like, wait, he was Draco,
Yeah.
And it's interesting because obviously Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint, they were really the main 3 that this whole thing centered around. And sometimes we'll see these actors now doing completely different things, and it's like you almost have to take a minute and be like, wow, they literally lived and breathed Harry Potter for 10, 12 years of their lives. And it's crazy that I don't think really during that time any of those 3 really did a lot outside of Harry Potter because, like I said, it was sort of their life. And the fact that J.K. Rowling wrote these books and then, she did have some input and whatnot on the movies. She even produced the last 2. And, it's crazy that, people will spend a good chunk of their lives just, working on one project or one franchise. Do you think that sort of is what really helped make these movies better? The fact that they were able to keep it consistent and, get all of these actors and actresses on board for the entire thing?
I definitely do. I think that's one thing that will separate it apart from a lot of movies. And you hear that a lot is like, well, I think it was this week, Deadpool 2 just lost the director from Deadpool 1.
Right.
And it's over creative differences. I think it was actually, from what I read, was over casting. I think the director wasn't interested in Kyle Chandler being in the movie. And it's like, you have to kind of be on the same page in order to make it work. I think we've seen plenty of franchises really damaged because everyone from the studio to the actors to the director. They weren't on the same page, and there's always been contract disputes, and that's what I think is so amazing about Harry Potter is not only, and maybe they didn't have. I'd like to think that, like you said, Daniel Radcliffe. I'd like to think he had offers, but he was like, I need to focus on Harry Potter because I can't just be busy all year round, and Harry Potter takes up so much of my life. I know he had to have had offers. I mean, now he can do whatever he wants, which is what I think is amazing. But
Right.
I think that's a big thing to kind of highlight is if you went onto IMDb, I'd say like maybe most of the cast did very little outside of Harry Potter, especially like especially the kids, but even more so. I mean, I'm sure it slowed down everyone from Alan Rickman to Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah, and I think, what's cool with these movies is they did a really, really great job casting for the whole series. It's like, I'm sure when they did the casting of Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint, it's like they had a vision for them going through and growing up with all of these movies because at the time, J.K. Rowling had already written 4 books. By the time the first movie came out in 2001, she had already written up through The Goblet of Fire, and then 3 more were written while the movies were being made. So even on her part, that is a lot of Harry Potter for one person because, she's probably following along with the movies being made and she's still writing these stories for what's going to come next. And then she's probably also like, okay, this, would be cool for a movie scene or something. I wonder if the fact that they started filming these movies and releasing them as she was still writing the series had any effect on, one or the other.
Yeah, I think that's a valid thing to question because if you compare it to Game of Thrones, right? Now the show is past all of the books that have been released.
Right.
But with your question, it's like maybe George R.R. Martin could have just co-wrote or had help from HBO, and like they could have bounced the ideas off of each other, and he could have finished the books. And instead, HBO decided we're not going to wait on you, and we're going to do our own thing. And so I think that's another thing that I love about Harry Potter is, like you said, half the books were written, and she didn't fail to finish. Right? She went through and she made sure that her vision was completed by her. And maybe there was some times where she said, this would be really good in a movie, but there was definitely a lot of scenes in the movie where, they were taken from the book, but there's obviously different adaptions and privileges that have been used to make the movie better. Right. Like, I think the obvious one is like Harry had green eyes and they didn't do that. So there's always going to be things where they don't really go forward with the book in full because they can't. I mean, the movie's already 2.5 hours long. I mean, if they did a true adaptation of the book to the movie, I mean, we'd be looking at probably another 8 movies.
Yeah, especially with how long all of her books are. And that's another thing I wanted to bring up. A lot of people, I know personally, I tend to like reading the books before seeing the movie, but sometimes that isn't the case. Like, I watched Fight Club before I read the book. And then, when I was reading the book, I found myself saying everything in my head in like Brad Pitt's voice or Edward Norton's voice. And, for something like that, it actually made the book a little more entertaining to read. And, that's another book and movie adaptation that I think were really well done. But a lot of times, you have these fans that are such big fans of the books that when someone takes it and wants to make it into a movie, they're a little skeptical of that. But, I'm looking at the Rotten Tomatoes scores and cinema scores for Harry Potter, and on Cinema Score, everything got an A- or above. And on Rotten Tomatoes, everything got a 78% or above. And for anyone who's paid attention to Rotten Tomatoes at all, that 78% is actually still a really good Rotten Tomatoes score. And you even have, the last movie with a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. And that is crazy to me. And when you look at the franchise as a whole, even, the box office numbers, like, a lot of these movies came very, very close to hitting $1 billion worldwide. And even, the last one went well over $1 billion. It was at 1.3 billion for, what the movie made worldwide. So I think it's safe to say that these movies all paid off. And, the Chamber of Secrets only had a budget of 100 million, which, to us normal people, that's a ton of money. But when you look at the fact that it made almost $900 million worldwide, you can't say these movies didn't pay off, even when, Prisoner of Azkaban dipped below 800 million. It's like, you know what? You spent 130 million on it and you still made a boatload of money. So,
it's good. Yeah. The odds were good. And, I think that, like I said, and maybe it's a bold statement, but I think it's the best franchise that we'll have in our lifetime. Lord of the Rings was good. I think Lord of the Rings took a hit because of The Hobbit being 3 movies. And I'm kind of worried about this new Harry Potter movie that's coming out.
Oh, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Yeah, I believe it's a prequel to all of this. And, I think it's always interesting when prequels are done well after the fact. I mean, it's been a little over 5 years since the movie came out, so it's not like, a 30-year gap like Star Wars or something like, we had Psycho and now Bates Motel is on TV as a prequel, and it's sort of just,
I think what I worry about is they announced this week that it's going to be 5 movies, and I don't know why we need 5. I don't know if each one's going to be about a different beast, or maybe, if you remember during like the Triwizard Cup, there were always different magic. There was magical schools, there was Hogwarts, and then there was always the other ones they didn't really talk about. So I don't know if we're going to basically kind of go through the history of magic, so to say, and learn more about the different schools or the global impact of the wizarding world. But I just think 5 is, you're gonna have 5 movies in that franchise, which is one more than half of the last franchise based on one book.
Yeah.
I don't know where they're gonna pull the information from, right? It's like, it's kind of a stretch.
Yeah, and I guess we just have to see if she starts writing even more books on it, just to kind of, do something similar to what happened with Harry Potter, where, some of the books were written and then she continued with the story. But yeah, I think I saw somewhere that it was going to be 5 movies, but I guess it didn't register in my head because, I've been seeing so much just about this first movie. And it does look interesting just from the previews and trailers and whatnot, but I'm kind of with you on this. I don't entirely know how they're going to get 5 movies out of that. And I haven't read the book for this one, actually. So it'll definitely be interesting.
But that kind of, it gives me the Hobbit vibes, because the Hobbit was one book, right? It was one book.
And they did, 3 movies on it?
They did 3 movies, and they were all extremely long.
Yes.
And it was just really they were basically flexing their muscles in terms of visual effects. And there's nothing wrong with the movies, right? They're visually stunning, but I get it. You can make orcs.
With something like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, I feel like, yes, that's also a great franchise, but I feel like something like Harry Potter was probably just more accessible, especially to kids. Because if you put a kid in front of a Lord of the Rings film, they might not be interested at all in it, because, there aren't
no
people that
characters
look like them in that movie.
Yeah, none of the characters are really, and everyone can relate with someone in Harry Potter, regardless of which character it is, right? If you're Ron and you're like the youngest of a couple siblings, or maybe you're adopted. I think that's one of the great things about Harry Potter is it helped people who didn't necessarily know their families, regardless of if it was because they were adopted or maybe there was a tragic death in the family. It allowed them to have a person who's in their age group who's going through the same things. And I think that's what's so special about it, is because, we're all going to, every high school student, unfortunately, will probably experience either a loss of an adult or a loss of a friend in their age group. But it's the same, it's like it's all kind of unspoken. It's like we don't know how to talk about it or how to deal with it. And And so with Harry, I think the scene with the mirror really might be one of the best scenes in the whole franchise, because he sees his parents,
Right.
and Dumbledore's like, look, it shows you what you want to see, but you'll go crazy because they're never coming back. And it kind of shows everyone that what's gone is not necessarily lost forever, but you can't let it hold you down, and you can't daydream about the past.
Yeah, definitely. And when you watched all 8 movies in a row, did you find that that maybe made it an even better experience to get them all in at once as opposed to having to wait, a year or 2 years in between movies? And, I know a lot of people will go back and rewatch movies before the next one comes out and that sort of thing, because I know I didn't do it with the whole Star Wars series, but before The Force Awakens came out, I went back and I rewatched the first trilogy just because I wanted a little bit of a refresher just on the Star Wars world in general. And I didn't really want to watch the second trilogy again because I remember watching it, once or twice, and it just didn't grab me the way that first trilogy did. So did you find yourself enjoying it more your second time through and being able to watch them all, within that week?
Yeah, I think watching them all in the shortest, if watching them all in the shortest period of time possible, kind of upped the ante for me in terms of emotional weight and just investment. Right, like you said, with Star Wars, you watched the first trilogy before you saw 7.
Right.
And so the last time I watched all 8 Harry Potter movies was never. I mean, I'd seen
Yeah.
them one at a time. And before Deathly Hallows 2, I watched Deathly Hallows 1. And so that's kind of how I approached it. And that's one of the things where, we all, as a culture, we like to binge watch now.
Yes.
But binge watching really translates best for TV, not necessarily franchises or trilogies,
Right.
just because it takes up so much time. So, but it does change things because you remember what happened, in each, you remember things as they come, and it kind of gives you a better perspective as to what's going on. Like, I think what's one of the things that I picked up on was that the Sirius Black, his whole family, I guess I never really realized it, but they're all like, all their names are based on astronomy. Like they're all based on stars, except for I believe like Draco's mom
Right.
is the only one, and she's part of the Black family. But you just remember stuff like that, and that's why it's so valuable to try and find the time to watch it all at once and give it a once over, and not wait every 2 years and do that. And I feel that way about all franchises. With the Hunger Games, I did that. I watched the first one, and then I would watch them before they would come out, and you kind of forget, like, oh yeah, that happened.
Yeah. And, with you only watching one or two a day, do you find that makes it easier to sort of differentiate what happened in, the first movie versus the third movie and whatnot? Because I know when I binge watch TV shows, like I think I went through the first season of Daredevil pretty much in one day, or I did, an episode or two the first night and then went through it all the next day. And it's like, for me, when I do that and you have like, 10 hours of TV that you've just been watching in one spurt, everything kind of gets blurred together. And you're like, especially on Netflix, because it just starts one episode right after the other, pretty much. It's kind of like, okay, wait, when exactly did this happen? And, when did we find out about this? But when you're only doing, a movie a day, did you think it was easier to sort of keep it all together? Like, this happened here, this happened here.
It definitely helped with the timeline. I think what was best was, when I was watching them, kind of remembering things differently. Like, I did not realize that Dobby came into the franchise so early, but now
Right.
it makes so much more sense, because when we get to the end of, I think it's in Deathly Hallows Part 2, he dies.
Yeah.
Scratch that. He dies in Deathly Hallows Part 1, right at the end.
Oh, yeah. Part one.
Like at the very end of Part 1, he dies. And that scene is so important. And, Harry's like, I want to bury him. And before we had really started watching all 8, in one week, when we got to Dobby, I was like, wow, I don't remember him being in the second movie.
Right.
Like, why is he? I just didn't remember that. And I know it's a minor character, but when you go, when you have 8 movies over the course of 15 years, you kind of forget like when things happen and how that can affect the story. And one thing I really wish they would have done is focus more on Malfoy, because by the Deathly Hallows Part 1, he is the bad guy.
Yeah.
But I feel like they didn't spend too much. They didn't spend enough time on him. The time they spent on him in each movie, I mean, maybe it was roughly 15 minutes a movie, just making us really feel like we don't like this guy.
Right.
But I do sympathize with him because he's just going off of what his parents wanted. He was just going off of family influence, and part of me feels like he had no real choice. And so I sympathize with that because he just did what he was told to do by his parents, and he's in high school.
Yeah, and I mean, the nice thing with the Harry Potter movies too is sometimes the title of the movie will kind of help you know what the big thing is that's going on here, especially, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. It's like,
Right.
Okay, the Goblet of Fire is in this movie, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. I read somewhere, it put it into perspective. It was basically like all the Harry Potter movies, when they're in the first one, when they're going into the Sorcerer's Stone and they have to go through the challenges, it basically reveals like how the whole movie franchise is, like what direction each one's going to be in. Even down to, like when they're trying to get the Sorcerer's Stone and Ron's playing chess, like that was basically an analogy of how like the Triwizard Cup was a chess match.
Right. Yeah, and with the Sorcerer's Stone, real quick, it's only known as the Sorcerer's Stone in the United States and India for whatever reason. Otherwise, everywhere else it's called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. So I don't know exactly why that is that they felt the need to change it for the United States and India. I don't know if it's maybe because here we have a different definition for philosopher and it's not the same thing as a sorcerer. So that was always just something that was interesting to me, that, it was different here. And I don't know if that necessarily will make us feel like there's something we're missing that the rest of the world gets and we don't, or what, but I was just always curious about that decision.
So I know the answer to that, and it's really bad because the publishers decided that American children wouldn't want to read a book with the word philosopher on it. And I know that's really shallow, but that's like, you can look it up. That's what happened.
That's the sole reason for it.
It was just all PR and marketing.
Okay.
And they just decided that children in the United States, we don't, and maybe parents as well. I mean, I know that there was a lot of uproar in religious communities because of how backwards some parts of the United States can get with the media. Where so like I do remember living in South Carolina, and everything was about, like, it was just wizards. Like everyone was freaking out about how the most popular book, like, oh, we're getting children to read, and the silver lining is that children are reading, but it was all bad because it was about witchcraft.
Right.
And so when you live in the Bible Belt, things like that definitely come up because everyone's kind of different down here. So I think they avoided the philosophy because they don't, philosophy as a whole can be very religious.
Right. Yeah, had never heard that before, but I mean, like you said, it kind of makes sense, but it's also quite shallow. But, to me, I don't know if it necessarily would have made a difference at the time because, let's see, I was probably 8 or 9 when the first movie came out. And I don't know if I even had any idea what a sorcerer was. You know what I mean? So
Right.
It's like, I think just the idea of Harry Potter alone was enough to get, kids to get their parents to take them to go see the movie. And I think, I don't know if that one word would have really had any bearing on how well the movie did in the United States and India. So
yeah, in terms of
think,
sales,
yeah,
I think they just went on a safe route. But I totally agree with you. Sticking with the Sorcerer's Stone, one thing you probably don't know, I didn't realize until I watched the credits. was Vern Troyer is actually in this movie, and it's the only movie he's in of the whole franchise.
Huh.
He plays Grip Hook, so he's one of the goblins, and he did it just for the first movie. And it's really weird because he was the physical actor of Grip Hook in The Sorcerer's Stone, but he was voiced by Warwick Davis. And then after the first movie ended, Warwick Davis came in, and not only was he doing the voice, but he did the body as well. And I don't know, I couldn't find a reason why, Vern Troyer didn't come back for a second movie. But I just think that's really interesting that, here we have one character who makes it all the way to the end of the movie. If you remember in the last in Deathly Hallows, he betrays Harry when they go into Gringotts to retrieve something from Bellatrix's vault.
Right.
So this character lives through 8 movies. I'm not sure if Vern Troyer just didn't want to come back. Maybe this is one of those things we were talking about where there was a financial dispute. But it just says he didn't reprise it, and I think that's kind of weird.
Yeah, especially, I mean, looking back now, obviously he wouldn't have known how big this franchise was just going to be based off of necessarily the first movie. Because I know we see with a lot of franchises, the first movie will do really well, and then if they do get a good sequel, that will usually do pretty well still, but it's kind of like the more you keep going with it, the more of a drop-off you see, which, thankfully that was not the case with all of these Harry Potter movies. And I wonder if, if anyone would be interested in interviewing him now and seeing, his thoughts on the franchise as a whole.
Of course, because I'm looking at his IMDb page, and so in 2001 he was in The Sorcerer's Stone, and then after that, I mean, he did have Goldmember, the third Austin Powers movie, but after that it's pretty much all TVs. It's just TV series. He was in Scrubs. He's been in Two and a Half Men, and a lot of appearances for sure. But looks like he hasn't been in a movie, since Goldmember.
Right.
He's got some movies coming out, soon, but looks like the last movie he's in was the Trailer Park Boys movie that came out last year. So definitely weird. Maybe there was some commitment that he couldn't. He didn't want to go through with it. But I thought that was really strange because, like you said, the budget was low and the profit was high, and they kept a lot of the cast together. I know there was a couple other cast members who didn't make it all the way through. I think was Draco's friend. I think it was Goyle.
Okay, yeah.
Let's see. So I think Goyle actually got arrested and got kicked off the movie.
Yeah,
and now he's a
that would probably do it.
Yeah. It says so. He's also an MMA fighter now, so he's doing that.
Yeah,
the funniest thing I've ever seen. The fact that that's real news is it's a very dramatic change in life. Life in jobs.
It looks like Goyle was in all of the movies.
Okay, so then it was my apologies.
Crab, maybe.
Yeah. So, that's another thing is you get them confused because they didn't really develop them too much, and maybe that's better now that the news that. Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, because it looks like Jamie Waylett, who played Crab, he was literally kind of just only in the Harry Potter movies, and that's the only acting he ever did.
Yeah.
Because it's he stops at 2009 with The Half-Blood Prince, and like you said, obviously, if he got arrested, that would probably do the trick for the Harry Potter series, especially since it was more of a family movie. Obviously, in Hollywood, actors and actresses have been arrested for various things all the time and they get through it, but they're not necessarily geared towards the family-friendly audience.
Yeah, it's just that is what. So that might be him and Vern Troyer might be the only people that didn't stick with the franchise. I mean, it says he was in six of the 8 movies, and he was arrested, violent disorderly conduct. So, I mean, that's not good, right? And it's not good because he missed out on 2 movies and probably a lot of money.
Yeah, and what ended up being, a huge finale because, like I mentioned, the final movie, Deathly Hallows Part 2, did better worldwide than any of the other 7 movies that came before it. So I think that just goes to show how much people love this franchise, that when it came to it and we had the last movie coming out, it's like everyone wanted to be there for this finale. And, obviously with Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, it's like, I wonder how much of a revival this is going to be because, like we mentioned with Star Wars, the first trilogy, really great, did really well. I'm sure the second trilogy still did well, but for fans, it's not the thing they go immediately to when you think of Star Wars. But then when The Force Awakens came out again after a long break in Star Wars movies, it's like The Force Awakens did really well. And, I went to go see it the weekend it opened, and I rarely go see movies at the theater anymore as it is, just because I find people are a lot more rude than they used to be in movie theaters and a lot more annoying. But that's a whole other story.
I'm the same way. It takes a lot to get me to the movies.
Yeah.
I went for The Force Awakens, but it does take a lot more now. And I feel like the rise of smartphones has actually made movie going not very fun, because no matter how many times you have a cute intro telling you to turn off your phone, nobody listens.
Right.
But that, like you said, is a story for another day. I think the revival part is interesting, and that's where, so we have Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and we just had that new book come out with, it's based on a play.
Yeah.
It's a play script, and I would really like that to become a movie. More than like a second, third, or fourth, or fifth Fantastic Beasts. I'd really like the play to get adapted into a movie, because it's the premise is, it's Harry Potter working at the Ministry of Magic, and his kid's the main character, and it kind of makes me think of the Star Wars direction where they're doing the spin-offs, right? We're gonna have we have Rogue One coming out in December, and Star Wars is gonna have they're gonna have the Han Solo movie. I don't know when. I think at some point, I know they've casted a lot of the characters for that movie. So I know they're going that route where we can explore more into the characters. And so maybe in the future, we might have a movie based on like Voldemort, like a prequel where it's basically Voldemort up until Harry's born.
Yeah.
Because we did have a lot of flashbacks. That's one thing, is there's a lot of flashbacks about Voldemort, and you definitely can piece together, what went wrong and what happened. But if we had a 2-hour movie just about him from maybe like 16 to bad guy, I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, and I think, with these movies, like you mentioned, they were so long, they were all pretty much 2 hours or longer, it seems. I think even with some of these things, you don't need to make them super long movies. You can do, an hour and a half to just under 2 hours or something. And, with Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, I don't know exactly how long that movie is, but it's set 70 years before the adventures of Harry Potter.
Right. So I guess that explains the five movies. They have a lot of time to cover.
Yeah. So I think, we could probably see that leading up to Harry Potter, or even just the birth of Harry Potter, not necessarily him being at Hogwarts. Because like you said, we got a lot of those flashbacks. And, we know what happened to his parents, and, we know a bit about Voldemort. So it'll be interesting. I'll probably follow along with these movies. I don't know if I'll go see them in theaters right away, but I definitely want to see how this pans out and how much of the Harry Potter series we will sort of see in this.
Yeah, and that's what, one thing I'm interested in is seeing how true it is, because I know there's a trailer out right now, and at the end they make a joke about Hogwarts. They say hogwash because they got to be, cheeky. But the thing about it that I'm worried about is when I watched the first time I watched the trailers, the trailer was very superhero kind of cut. It definitely, it had a lot of, it looked like Marvel made the trailer. right? It was
Yeah.
very like there's a battle going on in the city, and there's good and evil. It looked like the event. It looked like Wizarding Avengers, and maybe they're maybe that's I like I know you didn't read the book. I didn't read the book either, so maybe the beasts get out and there's this big war. But it just looked different because the Harry Potter movies have a lot of action, but they
Right.
have less action than you think.
Yeah, and it's definitely, a different type of action than what we see in, Civil War and Batman versus Superman and those movies. So I think, like you said, there was a lot of action in the trailer. But, I try not to base my complete opinion of what I think the movie will be like just on the trailer, because I know they even do this with TV. Like, they'll splice stuff together to make you think it's going in one direction, when if you don't have the context, it's,
Yeah.
totally different. So it's like, yes, trailers can be fun and everything, but, I know that I'm going to want to go see all of these new Star Wars movies coming up. Whether or not, I go opening weekend or not, that's another thing, because like we already said, going to the movies is a lot more frustrating now. And sometimes, when I went to go see Deadpool in theaters, a couple walked in with like a double stroller and just like
Yes.
parked it in the theater. And I'm like, we are in a Deadpool movie and you are going to bring two small children.
So we went opening weekend. I think that was the last movie I saw on opening weekend.
Yeah.
And it actually might have been. No, I guess I saw Civil War in
Okay.
theater.
Yeah.
So that I think I've only seen Suicide. I think I've seen 3 movies this year in theaters. Deadpool, Civil War, and Suicide Squad. So obviously my palette is not very diverse in terms of what I'm willing to see in theaters.
I think
But
mine was only Deadpool and Civil War, so I'm in the same boat here.
when at the end of Deadpool, it was the same thing. The lights came on, and the guy in front of me had like 2 kids, and they were just like, "Daddy, what's happening?" And that's where
Yeah.
it's like you can't, between people with Star Wars movies were just the same, right? There was a lot of talking and clapping. Um, I don't know. I don't know why people feel the need to clap in the movies. I know, like Star Wars, it's been a long time, and so you're like, "Oh my God, this is great!" But when you see the Millennium Falcon, you don't need to clap. It's in the trailer. Like wasn't a
Yeah.
surprise. It was in the trailer.
Yeah, and I mean, with when I went to see Star Wars, it was much more of like a respect thing that people were making noise. Like you said, people would clap. I thought it was a little strange, but I kind of, just went along with it because I didn't want to be the only person sitting there, not clapping at this, because it was, 8 a.m. on Saturday of the opening weekend or something. I went at some ridiculously early time and it was still completely sold out. And, I think that's a lot different than, people bringing in screaming children, having their phone go off.
Yeah.
That's much more tolerable, because, everyone in there is there to see the movie because, they completely respect the movie.
So one last thing I wanted to kind of bring up, and that I learned from the Harry Potter
Yeah.
binge week. I learned. Okay, so I learned a couple things. Other than Vern Troyer, I also learned that the actors who were portrayed by Mad Eye and Percy are actually related in real life. So if you
Oh,
look it up,
nice.
you can actually see it. I know the makeup and his jiggly eye kind of throws you
Yeah.
off, but I believe that he's the guy who plays Mad Eye is his uncle. And then I was more interested to look this up. So they're always saying he who cannot be named, and don't use his name.
Yeah.
I was always wondering why, because either I didn't remember, or they did. I don't think they go over it directly in the movies, and I don't think I remembered it from the books. But according to the internet, which we know we can trust, it basically says that Voldemort's name was a curse, so that if you said it when he was at his highest power, he could find you because you said it, and he'd come kill you. So
Right.
people wouldn't say it because they didn't want to be like have a trace on them for him to be like, I'm gonna come kill you now. which
yeah, it's almost like the old Bloody Mary tale or whatever,
right.
in the bathroom.
And that's another thing where, I don't think they talked about it in the movies directly. They just said, like, don't say it. But I don't think they ever said, because Harry says it all the time because he just
Right.
does not care. But I know there was parts where he says, "Why can't I say it?" And I don't think they ever really, they had a moment where they were like, because once he comes back, if whenever he hears his name, he's got like a geotag on you and he'll come get you.
Right.
And that was, speaking of geotags, I think that was probably my biggest gripe. And I know that it takes away from the movie, but if you're going to be able to create Horcruxes, like, how do you not know where and what all of your Horcruxes are, right? Like,
yeah.
he didn't know that Harry was a Horcrux. How, like, you guys are wizards. Like, how do you not have a spell that just like reveals, like a list of all of your Horcruxes?
Yeah, locates them for you.
Like, where's my Horcrux app? So that I know, like, all right, this one's been found. These 6 are safe. They're on the map. And I know that if he knew Harry was a Horcrux, or if he knew where all of his Horcruxes were, like, everything would change. But it's just one of those things where it was just like, you're asking me to believe that they can do magic and they can fly and they can split their souls, but that they don't remember how many times they've done that or to where they've, applied that part of their soul.
Yeah, and before we wrap this up, I think one of the things about this franchise too is this isn't something that, relies on technology in the movies itself to kind of get anything accomplished. It's fully, a magic community. And when you have franchises like, the Bourne movies or the Fast and the Furious movies, it's like you're relying on all of these fancy tech gadgets and all of these updates that you can put in your cars and that sort of thing. And I think for this Harry Potter franchise, it was sort of just refreshing that wasn't an aspect that they had to worry about. And, so many times we'll see in movies, oh, they have an Apple computer, they must be this kind of person and whatnot. And I think, this franchise is really able to just take you out of being so plugged into everything because it's a completely make-believe world and it's really, fiction at its finest. It serves the purpose of being a fictional story.
I couldn't agree more. And that's where it's like modern day me is like, why isn't he just aware of his Horcrux?
Yeah.
his Horcrux cachet. But you're right. I mean, I don't even know that I think if you watch all 8 movies, you might see like a telephone a handful of times, but it's never in the wizarding world. It's always like
in the Muggle world.
Yeah, when Harry's with the Dursleys, I think like there's one movie where he runs away and like I think he's at a bus stop and like he sees the phone ring somewhere. But you're right. I mean, for the most part, you barely see. There's no cell phones in the entire movie.
Right. It's always like a payphone or a landline, which don't really exist at all anymore.
And I definitely remember there was one payphone in when Harry and Ron and Hermione go to the Ministry of Magic, and that's like the entrance they use. It's like the visitor entrance, and it's one of the red phone booths. But it does these movies let you disconnect from the society we live in, where there's the internet, and that's crazy because they were filmed with the internet. But like you said, there's no computers.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. Well, now that we've talked all about Harry Potter, I kind of want to go back and watch all of the movies. So we'll see if I end up doing that now that fall TV is back and there's a lot to watch that, is new. But thanks so much for coming on and talking about this. I know you and I definitely have some more topics we want to get to in the future, which, that's kind of the cool thing about this podcast and my goal with it. I just want to kind of be able to talk about anything and everything that people want to talk about. I know you are a big Walking Dead fan, right? But, I have not seen a single episode. So, you suggested that and I was like, I don't think we could do that in time, Yeah. But it's cool sort of because for me, I get to find out all of these things I have in common with other people. And, I think even though it did take us a while to kind of get a topic locked down, I think, that's something that's cool for me to experience and hopefully for my guests as well. But yes, thank you again for coming on, and we will definitely have to have you back on.
Thanks again, and hope you guys have a great day.
Yes, thank you to our listeners, and definitely enjoy the rest of your day.